It's great to be with you, I have to admit. Like many of you, the news that we have to kind of go into this state of heightened isolation for the next few weeks through the holidays has not been easy. So I'm kind of looking forward to just hanging out together this morning and feeling like, I'm part of the community. So good to have you. Good for you to be here. As always, as you start to log on, we invite you to shout out to each other, let people know that you're here, connect to each other. It's one of the ways in which obviously we can feel like we're part of a wider community. Whether you're here for our live feed or you log on later in the week, simply a way to hear what others are reflecting on and thinking about, a chance for you to share some of your insights, maybe some perspectives on the theme for today, that sort of thing. And just a kind of a nice way to feel connected, obviously, particularly as we move into the holiday time. So let me talk a little bit about what I hope to do together today. The first thing is I want to kind of be guided by a few different pieces today as we think about and reflect on, what have we learned together, kind of being collaborators during this pandemic, and all the sacrifices that we've made, all the loss that we've had, all the challenges that we've faced, all the kind of introspection that we've probably engaged in. How do we pay attention to the momentum of all that and honor that momentum even as we're going to enter into another round of this through the holidays, and then, in some ways, shifting into the new year together with hopefully a hopeful spirit that we're going to be able to turn the corner on this thing. So it's both challenging times and at the same time kind of exciting that we might be able to move back into, I wouldn't call it normalcy. I don't think we're going to go back there, but we're going to move into a healthier landscape together. And so to do that, I want to do a couple things. I want to be guided by a poem that I'm going to read a couple of times today, which I think is a beautiful poem called After the Shipwreck. It's written by Alicia Ostreicher, and that poem will serve as sort of a centering piece for us today. And then I'll use some of the kind of the ideas in that poem as we reflect on the content for today. In addition, I had this moment this last week. I was doing an interview with the fire dancer who performed at our winter solstice last couple of years. We're putting together a winter solstice podcast. And so I wanted to interview some of the people, poets, singer-songwriters, fire dancer, fire artist, and kind of get their insight into how winter solstice has an effect on them and how they sort of prepare and get in touch with winter solstice. And I will tell you, and I'm going to share a little bit about this a little bit later on, as she kind of told her story and articulated how that works for her and how she moves into a relationship with the earth itself, to be in touch with the energy of the earth as she gets ready to perform or to bring her body's energy into resonance with that. The beauty of her description literally brought a tear to my eye. And I think, well, what am I getting, old and sentimental, or what's going on here? But I think it was something deeper than that. Her description tapped into, I think, some sort of existential longing that so many of us have to be connected in deep ways to the planet itself, to each other, to our own selves during this time. So I want to take a moment and also reflect on some of her insights. And then finally, I want to connect us to the Gospel of Mark. It's a kind of a situation in Mark's Gospel where people find themselves sort of having to pick which direction they're going to go in a time of crisis, very much like what we face today. And this idea that Mark proposes that for Jesus, and this is the true of so many different wisdom teachers, they manage to find a kind of a middle way, a different way than what we perceive as the alternatives. And so as spiritual people, how do we continue to find our way into that path that the kind of the trail untaken so often? How can we move down that trajectory more fully? So that's what I want to spend some time with today. So to get started, let's use this poem as a guiding principle. It's called After the Shipwreck. And if you've got a candle nearby, maybe light the candle so that you're kind of feeling like your body is present for this, and allow this metaphor of being lost at sea and the longing for reaching shoreline despite the vastness of the ocean's power as a way to move you into, again, the experience of what we as a planet are experiencing together, even as we wait for the longest of nights, and then, of course, after solstice, the slow arrival of a new shoreline we call springtime. So take a couple deep breaths and then listen to this poem. Lost, drifting on the current as the sun pours down like syrup drifting into afternoon. The raft endlessly rocks tips, and we say to each other, here's where we'll store the rope, the dried meat, the knife, the medical kit, the biscuits, and the cup, and we will divide the water fairly and honestly. Black flecks in the air produce dizziness. Somebody raises a voice and says, hey, listen, we know there is land. Somewhere, in some direction, we must know it. There is landfall, mountain range, on the horizon. There in our minds, then nothing. There only in our minds, and then nothing but the beauty of the ocean. The numberless waves like living hysterical heads, the sun increasingly magnificent, a sunset wind now hitting us as the spray begins to coat us with salt. We all stop our talking. We just try to remember. Another beautiful poem that will guide us in today's journey. So welcome. I think the reason why I teared up when I talked to Amber was there was some unfinished business that many of us are still holding on to from Halloween and even Thanksgiving. For us as a family, Lori and I always usually travel to Vermont for Thanksgiving. And the pattern's a little bit like this. I finish up my Sunday responsibilities, we pack up, we catch the red eye, and we head to Vermont. We fly all night long, and we land exhausted in the morning, because, who can sleep on a flight? Usually the grandkids are still in school, so we have a few hours to sort of get oriented and situated. And then that moment happens that launches our Thanksgiving time with our family in Vermont, when we pick the grandkids up from school. And that energy of reconnecting with your loved ones, that energy of being folded in the arms of the family that you love so much, and all of that childhood energy around Thanksgiving just consumes us. And I will tell you that it's full on from that moment of walking them home from school to that final moment that we get back on the plane again, totally exhausted. Exhausted from long nights and card games and children jumping on the bed and jumping on us and going for walks and spending time in nature and gathering around food and connecting with family and friends back in Vermont. That whole energy of that week it just wipes you out. And you get on the plane again, hopeful that you can get a little bit of sleep before you land in San Francisco and fight your way on the BART train all the way back to Lafayette. That was the character of our Thanksgiving. That's what we remember about our Thanksgivings. It's almost like a promised land, a little bit of a slice of Eden that we would return to and feel the experience of connection in such a deep and meaningful way every year. And while Thanksgiving this year was delightful, even Halloween had its delights, that piece was missing for so many of us, for so many of us, that capacity to deeply connect. And Zoom was but a Band-Aid over Thanksgiving. I remember the Zoom calls we had with our own families. We put together a collective Zoom call to try to make some connection. You know, it just ultimately lets you down, right? As you log off, you realize you haven't had the experience of true connectivity that you long for. But I'll remember in that conversation that we had, we paused for a moment and asked each other, you know, what have we been grateful for? What do we want to give thanks for on this day? And I have to admit, I was thinking mostly about job security, you know, worried about my finances and my, you know, my 401ks, like, you know, like you do. Everybody else, however, talked about just this depth of gratitude for their relationships with family and friends. You know, just they knew, probably because they couldn't experience it at the level that they're used to experiencing, sort of the depth of that capacity for connection with one another. And I will tell you that as I listened to them, as I heard them describe how family matters, and I think family with a small f, you know, our little families, but also the greater human family, the interconnectedness to the natural world and to each other and to stranger, all of that was what they were grateful for. It hit me that community and connection is such a gracious gift, right? There is, if you will, this almost gravitational pull for communion, to be with one another, to breathe together, to sing together, to feel connected to another, to feel connected to the earth and the stars and the animals and the plants and the community in which you are held. That interconnectedness, that deep and abiding sense of family is sort of the ache of loss that many of us experience as we live in this isolated moment and know that we're going to have to live through that again through the holidays. And I think it's that realization that I'm assume that you share as well, that the heart of our human experience, no matter when we're invited to live that human experience, is our capacity to deeply connect to the experience and to one another. And when we don't have the chance to do that, we feel the loss and we feel the ache. And that's why that conversation with Amber, I think, brought me to tears. Because I realized that as she described her method, her process that she uses to connect to the experience of solstice, it was that magic of connection that I know and knew had been missing in my own life. I realize, like you, that the real longing I have is to live again inside of those relationships, whether they be at the theater or in church or in family gatherings or at the park or in a crowded restaurant or at a bar or wherever it happens to be, right? That synergy of interconnectedness has such power for us that I think it's something that we all long to honor again as we think about how we will land again on that new shoreline. Once our raft boat settles again on solid ground, how will we journey in a way that remembers and connects to the power of our collective life? I wonder. With that in mind, I want you to hear again this poem and just listen to it again, kind of imagining how time spent again on this raft boat on the ocean might allow you to move beyond the worry or the anxiety about where we store all the gear that will get us through. That's not necessarily, I think, where we'll focus this time. We've mastered that. We've made it this far, right? So it's not about where we're hiding the pocket knife and the water bottles. There's a different character to it this time. How will we spend the next few weeks, even as the nights grow longer, kind of hibernating in this space again so that we can remember what matters most and trust that that will be possibly the land on which we all arrive on the other side of this great shipwreck. Lost, drifting, on the current as the sun pours down like syrup drifting into the afternoon. The raft endlessly rocks and tips, and we say to each other, you know, here is where we will store the rope, the dried meat, the knife, the medical kit, the biscuits, and the cup, and we will divide the water fairly and honestly. Black flecks in the air produce a kind of dizziness, and somebody raises the voice and says, listen, we know there is land somewhere, in some direction. We must know it. Landfall, mountain range, on the horizon, there in our minds. But then nothing but ocean. Numberless waves, like living hysterical heads, the sun increasingly magnificent. A sunset wind hits us, and the spray begins to coat us with salt. So we stop talking, and we try to remember. We try to remember what matters, don't we? I think, like you, who probably a part of some wisdom tradition or have gleaned wisdom from others along the way, most of the energy of those wisdom traditions is really an invitation to a depth of connectivity, right? If you think about the Buddha or Jesus or Taoist poetry or the longing of the Hebrew people to live together in community and to create a bond with their understanding of the divine. You think about spiritual practices like yoga, connecting to the body, to the breath, all that energy about deep and abiding connection is really an invitation to breathe into the life that you've been invited to live, right? That's where the energy is at, right? That's where the heart of the experience is at. And as I was reading Mark's Gospel, getting ready for the Mark study, I was realizing that for the Jesus movement, they too had a different kind of path that they were inviting people to journey down that I think connects us to this theme for today. In Mark's Gospel in particular, they were at a time when they were in the middle of the Jewish-Roman wars. And so while they had gained back their most sacred land for a while, they knew that Rome soon would come sweeping through and reclaim the land for themselves. And so people were kind of having to make a decision, a choice. Would they stand up for and fight for the past that they all knew so well? Is that what they would do? Or would they acquiesce and just give in to the new way in which Rome was constructing life and just say, let's just give in and kind of go down that path? And those were two options, right? They both had kind of an apocalyptic flavor to them because they could either fight and potentially die to preserve a past that was now gone, or they could kind of lose their past and just give in to a future that they didn't choose for themselves, but was part of Roman imperial life that was thriving at the time, right? They had to decide, but they knew that there would be some sort of break with their with their current trajectory in order to enter into either one of these. And in this part of the Markan text, Mark has Jesus saying, you know, you don't have to take either one of those roads. You don't have to just try to resurrect the past and cherish it because the past is somehow sacred, and you don't have to just give in to the whimsy of wherever culture is taking you. What Jesus was inviting you into, according to Mark anyway, was you could simply engage the other, the neighbor, each other, kind of as family. Sink rather into relationship and see where that leads you. See where the dynamism of a present relationship, even with people who are a stranger to you, even with people who don't think like you, with Jews and Gentiles, men and women, slave and free, wealthy and poor, they all belong at table together. And so in some ways, the invitation was exactly what we talked about up to this point, right? It is an invitation into the depth of human relationship, of connectivity with one another, the great communion, the great commons. And I would say, while Jesus was an environmentalist, clearly, we understand today that that commons includes the natural order, the cosmos itself. Can we find our way, not by reaching back into the past and holding on to the stuff that we think is most important, or just acquiescing to whatever is going to become of us, but rather enter into the dynamism of that kind of depth of relationship, and in there is the mystery and the invitation that we might find the new promised land. It's moving us beyond worry, beyond anxiety, and into community. Trusting, listening to each other, understanding each other, exploring each other's perspectives, and finding out from there a new way forward. Could that be a spiritual path? Could that be something that we pay attention to as we kind of float for the next while on our raft, as we begin to move into the wonder and the quiet of wintertime, and in a sense hibernate again to tend to the things that matter most, so that when we all have a vaccine in our arms, right, and we begin to re-engage, we remember what really matters. And we follow that pathway into New Frontier. I think in some ways, as I listened to Amber sharing her connection with the cosmos, her way of finding a connection that was so deep that it could manifest itself through her body, that not only do I long for that same thing, but I guess you do too, right? That connection is your guiding principle. Whether it be with the people you love the most, whether it be with extended family, the community, your theater group, your gardening group, your neighbors and friends, or even more, people you don't understand as fully, to kind of live into the what we call the porous nature of relationship, seems like a great invitation to me. Finally, in the last couple days, Gideon has been wrapping up his podcast series. He has 2 more sessions, I think 1 more left. But let me see if I can find it here. His recent episode that he just shared, episode 10, if you want to go back and listen to that on Soul Forum, Gideon shared for a little bit about how he was a kind of a conservative Christian pastor coming out of rural Kenya, and yet he's studying in the PhD program at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. And he reflects for a while on kind of the arc of his own transition of wanting to stay true to his heritage, not wanting to disconnect from that, but also wanting to foster a kind of a porous or open nature to his spiritual life that allows other ideas and people and concepts to begin to percolate alongside of all that he used to know, so that it might lead him into different kind of territory. And you can tell how dynamic and scary and challenging and wonderful that is. But that capacity for us to be changed by our deep and abiding relationship with something that is different than us or other than us or maybe deep inside of us is sort of the wonder, I think, that Gideon was tapping into as we try to move forward. How do we reactivate our society in a way that brings health and wholeness? For him, that was the path forward. It's a great podcast to listen to, so I would encourage that for you. And I guess in the end, as we kind of wrap this up, I think what I would encourage you maybe to think about, and I know this is for me too, right? So this next round of kind of being isolated again, how do we spend this last month or so on the life raft, paying attention to the beauty of the grand ocean that holds us all, to both remember what matters most and try to find our way into that, and then trust that we will begin to land on other shores. And in that moment and we've talked about this, carry forward not only the wisdom we've gleaned along the way, but the wisdom that we've discovered by being attentive to others and to poetry and to our own religious traditions, so that we might create the kind of almost like promised land. I don't want to say that it's like the promised land, but a promised land that is born out of that which really matters, this connection that we have to one another and to the planet. That's my hope for you as you journey as well through this time and into another unique holiday where we're all going to be holed up again for a while on our own. A final reading of After the Shipwreck. Lost, drifting on the current as sun pours down like syrup, drifting into afternoon, that raft endlessly rocks and tips, and we say to each other, here's where we'll store the rope and the dried meat and the knife and the medical kit, the biscuits and the cup, and we'll divide the water fairly and honestly. But black flecks in the air, they produce a kind of dizziness. Somebody raises their voice and says, listen, we know there is land somewhere, in some direction. We must know it. There is landfall, there is mountain range on the horizon, and then in our minds, nothing. Nothing but the beauty of the ocean, the numbless waves like living hysterical heads, the sun increasingly magnificent, a sunset wind hitting us, and as the spray begins to coat us with salt, we stop and we remember. That's a beautiful poem. For some reason, that phrase, as the wind coats us with salt, it pauses us and we begin to remember again. As you journey through these next few weeks, and hopefully you journey a little bit with us too on this platform, right? I hope that you can find your way into the kind of passion for that which matters most for you. Let that guide you as you get out of the lifeboat and begin your journey on shore again. In the meantime, enjoy the grandeur of the ocean. Amen to that, huh? All right, all. Thanks for hanging out today. Obviously, it's Christmas time, so we've got the Nutcracker, a couple of wise folk heading to see the manger, a little bit of decorations. We're getting there. I don't have too many announcements today. I do suggest you listen to Martin's song that he put together today, kind of a different version of the hymn he played last week. It's a reminder that how do we pay attention to the stars themselves, the cosmos themselves that kind of guide us to this manger, lead us to a new way of thinking. Clearly, it's a lovely song to pay attention to as we journey through this Advent season together. And then if you join us at 11 o'clock down at the church, we will have our kind of parking lot, what do they call it, drive-in service down there. I'm going to be spending a little bit more time on the Markan narrative around the genealogy and why genealogy matters in the telling of the birth stories, and particularly Mark, who has no birth story at all, who links Jesus' ministry not to some kind of moment of divine intervention, but in the long history of prophets that just concluded with John the Baptist and now picks up with Jesus. How does Jesus build on this legacy of voices, and where do we find ourselves in that legacy as well? We hope to publish that live. It too will be fed through this feed as well today, so you can watch that if you're interested. And with that, we'll send you on your way. Thanks for being a part of today. Obviously, pay attention to what other people commented. That's always a good thing to be doing, so you kind of get a sense of where other people are at as they reflect on the theme for the day. And then I'm really excited. Next week, I'm inviting a guest to join us. Lee Von Ham will be here, and he will reflect on the birth story as an invitation to kind of think more creatively about our role in the universe. And he's done some real great work, I think, about thinking about how cosmos plays a role in the birth story that we often don't see. So I'm going to interview him next week, and then he's going to do a podcast with us so that you can dive a little bit deeper into his content. So join us next week for that interview. All right. We'll see you on the other side.